The use of an aerial platform to spy on one's enemies is not a new concept. In fact, the French revolutionaries used balloons to observe enemy maneuvers, and in particular during the 1794 conflict with Austria at the Battle of Fleurus. The first fixed-wing reconnaissance in combat conditions took place during the Balkans War of 1912. Greek and Bulgarian Albatros aircraft were used. During World War I, the Rumpler Taube was used for surveillance and photography. Fred Zinn used the Taube, with its translucent wing, to fly above enemy positions above 400 meters, where the aircraft was difficult to spot from the ground. The French called it the invisible aircraft. These aircraft detected the advance of the Russian army at the Battle of Tannenberg in 1914. Prior to the Second World War, longer-range bomber aircraft were utilized for photographic reconnaissance missions. They retained their armament for self-defense. In 1939, the Japanese built the Mitsubishi Ki-46. Armed with only a single machine gun facing to the rear, it was an effective reconnaissance aircraft. It entered service in 1941. The concept of using light, fast, high-altitude aircraft for reconnaissance was introduced in 1939. This was necessary to avoid enemy detection or interception, thereby improving their capability. Spitfires and Mosquitoes and the America P-38 and P-51 Mustang were pressed into service. Stripped of weaponry with modified engines for improved altitude performance and repainted in sky camouflage colors, these aircraft were fitted with cameras. At altitudes above 40,000 feet, the cameras had to be heated, and the British developed an effective system allowing them to fly up to 100 recon flights a day at very high altitudes, enemy locations, without detection. After World War II, modified bombers were once again employed in the reconnaissance role. With the advent of jet power, these craft, the English Electric Canberra and the US Martin B-57, could travel further, faster and higher than their predecessors. In the late 1950s, the US and Lockheed began construction of the secret U-2 spy plane, specifically developed to fly over Soviet airspace. Nicknamed the Dragon Lady, the single-engine aircraft looked more like a glider than a jet fighter. With a flight ceiling of 21,000 meters, it was thought that no Soviet fighter could touch it. The U-2 flights would regularly fly over Soviet ICBM fields and other military installations and photograph them. The Soviets tried many times to intercept, but were unable to, until 1st May 1960.
Secret reconnaissance of Russia by high-flying American U-2 jets ended when one was downed deep in Soviet territory. Its pilot, Francis Powers, was made the subject of a showcase trial. Powers' family was in the courtroom as Russia began massive exploitation of this propaganda windfall. Powers' conviction was inevitable, and the U-2 affair became Khrushchev's pretext to torpedo the Paris Summit Conference. But Mr. K's ultimatums to the Big Three overplayed his propaganda advantage.
When officials stated, after firing a volley of 14 SAM missiles, the Soviets had shot a U-2 plane down. The pilot bailed out and was captured. Gary Powers, a pilot under the employ of the CIA, was tried for espionage. The Powers showcase was a propaganda hit for the Soviets and a major embarrassment for the Eisenhower administration, who had previously denied such flights or aircraft existed. The Soviets made maximum points by televising the proceedings live around the world. Powers was found guilty of espionage against the Soviet Union and sentenced to 10 years in prison. 21 months later, he and another American captive were exchanged for Soviet spy Rudolf Abel in Berlin.
In 1957, convicted Russian spy Rudolf Abel was sentenced to 30 years, escaping the death penalty after his attorney argued that the United States might want to swap Abel for an American at some future time. Now, Abel has been exchanged for U-2 pilot Gary Powers.
It was not for many years that the truth of the shootdown came to light. Apparently, a volley of 14 SA-2 missiles were fired, but they only managed to shoot down a pursuing MiG-19. A Soviet pilot in a stripped-down Sukhoi Su-9 managed to reach the same altitude as the spy plane, but with no weapons managed to fly close enough to the U-2 to catch it in its slipstream. The unstable U-2, with a very high stall speed, flipped over and snapped off its wings.
two planes touched down at RAF Upper Heyford in Oxfordshire this morning at intervals of about 20 minutes apart. They've covered the 2,950 miles from Plattsburgh, New York, in 7 hours. That's an average speed of about 420 miles an hour. This is the plane that Gary Powers was shot down in over Russia.
On 27 October 1962, during the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, another U-2 was shot down. The Cubans used a Soviet SA-2 Guideline SAM missile. This time, however, the pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson Jr., was killed.
The United States has successfully developed an advanced experimental jet aircraft, the A-11, which has been tested in sustained flight at more than 2,000 miles an hour and at altitudes in excess of 70,000 feet. The performance of the A-11 far exceeds that of any other aircraft in the world today. The development of this aircraft has been made possible by major advances in aircraft technology of great significance for both military and commercial applications.
In the 1960s, the SR-71 Blackbird was developed under a cloak of secrecy. This long-range strategic reconnaissance aircraft could reach speeds of Mach 3 and a sustained altitude of 24 kilometers. The design technology was a flow-on from the Valkyrie bomber project. An early development was the Lockheed A-12 recon aircraft produced for the CIA from designs by Clarence Kelly Johnson and tested at Groom Lake in the Nevada desert. The A-12 was produced between 1962 and 1964. It saw service from 1963 to 1968. The SR-71 was designed to operate at high speeds and altitudes, which caused some unusual anomalies when the craft was on the ground. The fuselage panels of titanium were loose-fitting when cold. Only when the aircraft was in high-speed flight and the panels heated would they expand and secure the body. The airframe would grow several inches in length during flight. This also extended to the fuel system, so when on the ground, the air gave aviation fuel everywhere. Once airborne, the SR-71 would do some high-speed passes, the air friction heating the body, sealing the fuselage. Then the craft would refuel mid-air before proceeding off onto its mission. To keep the leading edges of the wings cool during sustained flight, fuel was pumped through pipes under the wing's surface, reducing the temperature. Early stealth technology was incorporated into the Blackbird design, but this proved ineffective as the aircraft signature at Mach 3.2 was huge. There were over 4,000 attempts to shoot down the SR-71. None was successful. The aircraft's evasion plan for missile attack was simply to accelerate. No missile at the time could catch it. A total of 32 were built before budgets and politics stopped its production. However, satellite technology, although more expensive, had a very low maintenance cost, unlike the part-strapped SR-71, and soon satellite surveillance was the norm. The US is claimed to have developed a hypersonic spy plane called the Aurora, although these claims are still being denied. Maritime surveillance is an area that still relies on aircraft such as the Nimrod Mr2 and PC Orion to locate submerged threats such as strategic nuclear-armed submarines. Developed from the Avro Lincoln bomber, the Shackleton was the British answer to maritime surveillance in the early 50s. Employed in several roles, the four-engine aircraft with counter-rotating propellers suffered from its Griffon engines, noisy, thirsty, and requiring constant maintenance. Apart from anti-submarine and surveillance missions, it was later adapted for airborne early warning and search and rescue missions.